Well, I mentioned this review in my Year 1 retrospect, and I've been wanting to do this one for a long time. So let's get right to it. This is 1960 Psycho versus its 1998 remake. First, a little history. Psycho was based off a novel written by Robert Bloch, which was released a year prior in 1959. Joseph Stefano adapted the novel into a screenplay to be directed by the great Alfred Hitchcock. Though it's relatively tame by today's standards, this was the most shocking film to be released during the time period. It made the horror genre respectable again, and it has a killer twist ending that still holds up great today. It broke all kinds of rules of what you could show in a motion picture, and is most likely the frontrunner for the slasher genre. In fact, little did we know that 18 years later, the lead actress's daughter would become a scream queen, but more on that later. Psycho is one of my favorite films, but it's also without a doubt one of the best films ever made, period. Now here's my first question. Why would anyone decide it would be necessary to remake a masterpiece like Psycho? Well, I don't expect anyone to answer me through my computer, so let's figure it out for ourselves. Let's start out with the biggest thing that this film does wrong. Everything is shot for shot redone. Every bit of dialogue, every camera angle, every musical cue. It's the same exact movie, only with a modernized setting and new actors. What clicked in the director's brain that this would be a good idea? A remake should only be made if a writer or director feels that they can bring something new to the story or characters. Granted, that's not always the case, but that's what it should be. So if for some reason you felt the need to remake Psycho, why not make it closer to the original novel? I don't know how well the 1960 original followed the novel, but surely it strayed somewhere. It's really quite senseless to copy something that's already perfect. Almost no one will be on board with you. So you're probably thinking to yourself now, well, if the movie is a direct copy, shouldn't it be pretty decent? Well, I think a lot of that boils down to the actors. Janet Leigh played Marion Crane in the original. She's really memorable in the role and does a great job with it. And Hesh plays Crane in the remake. While I will admit she does a good job, she portrays Crane much differently than Leigh did. It's a little hard to explain. Milton Balsam plays private investigator Arbogast in the original. Again, memorable, fine work. William H. Macy plays Arbogast in the remake. He does good work too, but then again, it's kind of hard not to like Macy. Now this is when we get to the main course. Anthony Perkins plays the motel owner Norman Bates in the original film. He does an eerily convincing job as Bates. Even though he seems harmless enough, you can tell that something isn't quite right about him. And as the film progresses, that gets to be more and more clear. And Perkins stays with it the whole time. So who plays Bates in the remake? Vince Vaughn. Do I really need to say any more? I mean, Vince Vaughn as Norman Bates. That pretty much sums up the whole remake. He's nowhere near as creepy as Perkins was in the role, and he plays the whole movie in the same exact way. No progression like I just said. But I will be fair, I didn't find Vaughn to be a god-awful like a lot of people do. I mean, he's a fair actor, it's just the choice of him for Bates is so peculiar. Now let's talk about the music. Psycho has some of the most easily recognizable pieces of horror music, but it almost never was to be. Hitchcock originally wanted all the scenes in the motel to be without music, but when composer Bernard Herrmann came to perform the piece he wrote for the shower scene, Hitchcock gave him a pay raise, and thus musical history was made. The music in the remake is done by Danny Elfman and Steve Bartek, who was the lead guitarist for Oingo Boingo. Now, normally I would praise this aspect because it's Danny friggin' Elfman, and Bartek being on board just makes it cooler. But the music doesn't even sound any different from Herrmann's original pieces. So no matter how good a job Elfman did with the re-recordings, you gotta give credit where credit is due, so great job, Herrmann. Like I said earlier, the remake is modernized a touch. Marion's sister is now a music junkie, always listening to a Walkman. and the $40,000 that Marion stole in the original is up to $400,000. And there's a scene involving Bates peeking on Marion changing that I don't really want to talk about, but you'll know it's different. I'm going to talk briefly now about the famous shower scene. The remake somehow screws this up. During the shower scene, several clips of stormy clouds are edited in. Some may say it's showing how dark this point in the film is. Some may say it's artsy. I say it's distracting. Something similar happens in the second kill, too. It doesn't add anything, it just takes away from the present situation. Plus, the remake has more nudity and blood, which would usually please me, but since the original did more with much less, I feel it isn't necessary. 1960 Psycho was such an influential film. It inspired John Carpenter to make Halloween in 1978, starring Janet Leigh's daughter, Jamie Lee Curtis. What did the 1998 film inspire? Well, I honestly think it inspired the slew of slasher remakes we have today. Because if this film could copy a great film, why can't some other genius? So, which film wins? Well, do you really have to ask? The original is supreme. But I'm still gonna say check out the remake, but only after seeing the original. Is it a good film? No, it's not. But is it god-awful? I don't think so. Even though it completely copies the original, at least it was something great. It isn't, well, original, but it does kind of balance out and make the remake a little tolerable. But even then, to copy a masterpiece like Psycho just shows how ununique your film really is. Even the remake's director, Gus Van Sant, says it was an experiment that shows a shot-for-shot copy just doesn't work. So I will say check it out for curiosity's sake. But if you're thinking of seeing the remake before the original, you're the psycho here. That is my diagnosis, and more Flamingo Halloween is on the way.